What's it doing? It says start recording. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Recording is on and we can continue. Yes. So yesterday we did the basic model of Turing machines. I hope you got some feel for how Turing machines work. And while it is compared to modern day programming languages, Turing machines are, hopelessly inconvenient. They form a very, very basic model of computation that Turing defined much before modern computers were invented. And obviously, this is something that you can mechanically execute, right? I mean, what does Turing machine have? It is in one of finite set of states, which you can remember using finite number of bits in finite number of latches. You have a tape. Of course, you have assume unbounded amount of paper in order to do your calculation. So you assume an unbounded tape. Tape is divided into cells. At each cell, you can write a symbol, you can read that symbol, and based on the current symbol and the current state, you can make a decision. And the decision is what is you will change your state from P to Q. You will erase the current symbol in the current cell and rewrite it with B instead of A, and you will shift your head one to the left or one to the right. So the overall idea is that we have this big memory available and we can write it with various kinds of symbols while we are doing the calculation. But your calculations involve only local changes to the machine. In the configuration, your head is pointing to some cell. You are in some finite one of finitely many states, and you just change the local cell and move the head locally one step to the right or one step to the left. So your moves are very simple and very easy to implement. But by doing a succession of these moves, you can do quite complex calculations. And we saw that these machines, by spending doing a lot of steps, doing many phases, going up and down, could recognize languages like A raised to n, B raised to n, C raised to n, or even languages like WW, which are not context free, right? So we saw the example of languages like WW being recognized by first putting a right end marker at the end of the word, then instead of A, writing it as A left for the symbol on the left, and writing A right on the symbol on the right, or B right. So you convert all the symbols in alternate phases. You convert symbols like this. I mean, we saw these examples, so you got a feel for how Turing machines work, right? And Turing's argument was that my machine may be very basic, but by doing a series of very simple steps, I am able to simulate very complicated operations. And so, first thing we can think of is we can try to extend Turing machines by newer mechanisms which seemingly make it more powerful. So, some models we will see are something called multi-tape Turing machines, or we can add non-determinism to the Turing machine, where an angel will guide you as to which of the non-deterministic choices has to be made. Or you can have, instead of having this infinite tape as memory, you can have other forms of memory. We will see all of this. Push down two, we had this push down automaton with one stack, right? Instead, suppose we allow our system to have two stacks, or maybe k stacks, so we get multi-stack push down automata. Or in place of either a tape or a stack, you may allow a counter, and we may allow up to k counters to be used, so these are called multi-counter automata. And so there are these many different kinds of powerful automata that we can design. And what what is been shown is that all these seemingly more powerful models can be simulated by basic Turing machine. What do I mean by simulated? If this more complex Turing machine has a configuration gamma, and in one step of that powerful machine M, in one step it goes to gamma prime, then what I can do is I can somehow represent this configuration by a basic Turing machine, a more Turing machine having many more states and things like that. We will have a configuration called gamma hat which corresponds to gamma, but this is a configuration of my basic Turing machine. And I will do many steps, so I will go through several steps, uh, and I will reach a configuration called gamma prime hat, which will represent this. So I will emulate the one step working of this powerful machine by carrying out several steps of my basic Turing machine, and somehow I will represent, the configuration of my advanced Turing machine by some sort of configuration of the basic Turing machine using many more states or many more tape symbols, something like that. But I will be able to emulate one step working by some finitely many step working of the basic Turing machine. And so my simulated Turing machine will show the same behavior as the original Turing machine, in the sense that if my more advanced Turing machine by a sequence of moves reaches a terminal configuration, my simulated machine will also reach a terminal configuration on a given input. If my advanced machine rejects, then simulated machine will also reject, and if the advanced machine loops, the simulated machine will also loop. So there is a kind of exact correspondence between runs of the original machine and this more lower level runs of the basic Turing machine. So this is the sense in which Turing said that his machine could simulate all these powerful machines, and we will see some of these simulations today. Okay, so this basic machine is not so powerless. It may be inefficient, but it is not so powerless. That is the message. And in fact, going further, there are these other more complex systems of computation, something called Gödel's mu recursive function. I briefly introduced this in the very introductory class, first lecture, right? This is a way of defining functions over natural numbers, something like square, or power of 2 to the power n, or x to the power y, or many other complicated functions. And Gödel defined a system of recursively defining such functions, and it is shown that most functions of interest could be defined within what is called primitive recursive functions. Gödel added one more operation to it, and he defined a class called mu recursive function. So this was considered as a very powerful language for defining functions over natural numbers. Almost all known functions in mathematics, where could be defined, which were useful, could be defined within this class. And it has been shown that even this mu recursive function calculation can be simulated by basic Turing machines. So Turing machine is very powerful. Similarly, there is another system of calculating function and function application on which modern day functional programming languages like Haskell or Python or OCaml are built. These are called lambda calculus. And again, it was shown that Turing himself showed that this lambda calculus could be simulated by Turing machine. In fact, Church showed that these mu recursive functions could be simulated by lambda calculus, and Turing showed that lambda calculus could be simulated by Turing machines. So these Turing machines, while these mu recursive functions and lambda calculus are rather complicated systems of calculating, although they are mechanical, they require quite complex mechanism to execute them. Turing's machine was rather simple, and he showed that in spite of its simplicity, it could do the job of these more advanced models of computation. And building upon some ideas of Church, they claimed that any computational system like this mu recursive, lambda calculus, current day advanced computers, quantum computers, can all be simulated by Turing machines. And Turing gave a philosophical argument for this, but it's very believable. Because you don't know what machines will be built in future, you can't give the proof of this, but you can give a philosophical argument to say no matter what those machines will be, till they are mechanical, they embody some idea of mechanically calculating, I will be able to simulate it using Turing machines. And the Church Turing thesis is that any computational system can be simulated by Turing machines. So Turing machine in some way embodies the essence of what is mechanical calculation, and this is a very large thesis. So in some sense, anything that is mechanically calculatable can be done by Turing machine. This is the current day belief. And there is no counter example to this, and all these complicated systems of calculations can be simulated by Turing machines, right? So we'll see some of the simple simulations today, but you should know that such things are possible. So any questions about this general introduction so far? I think
So
you
is
should
there
also
any
see.
difference
Yeah.
between an automata and a machine?
Pardon?
Is there any difference between an automata and a
No, no, we
machine?
use this synonymously.
Okay.
Machine is automaton is of course abstractly in terms of finite state and tape and a read write head. A machine, physical machine, would actually talk about flip flops to implement those finite set of states, maybe using a magnetic tape memory or a flash memory or something like that, right?
So just to make the distinction between a fully theoretical model and a
Right. So this is an abstract model
right?
of mechanical computation, but still it's very mechanically calculatable with current technology, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that in some sense could be it. Any other questions from anybody else? So do you see the intellectual sort of depth of what is being said? That this simple machine that we saw will calculate anything that can be calculated by any machine anytime in future. That is what this Church Turing thesis is saying. Unless we find some new physical phenomenon, which which does not fit into this notion of having some configurations, looking at local part of the configuration and making local changes to the configuration. You know, till these principles are violated, a Turing machine is going to be able to do the job. So we will see some examples of this, and this nature of simulating complicated things by simple Turing machine will become clear to you. That is the agenda today. Okay. Okay, if there are no further questions, I'll go ahead. I can't see your chat, so please unmute and ask. Huh? Okay, I hope the recording is still going on. Let me just confirm once. Yes, yes, it's going on. Very good. Okay, so first thing we will see is something called a multi-track Turing machine. So we had this old day cassette tape recorders where there was a head and we stored the current value of the waveform, audio waveform, by the level of magnetization, and the head could read the level of magnetization, right? But then we could do stereo recording. So there were two tracks and there was only one head, but it could read both the two values of magnetization on the two tracks simultaneously. Similarly, in a Turing machine, you can have k tracks, and the head, there would be only one head. It would be at one position, but it would read the value of all the tracks at that position, right? So your transition function would look like this. Here is an example of a three-track machine. Disregard these hats for the moment, okay? So what the Turing machine can do is it can be in some current state and it reads the value of all the three tracks below the current head position. So it will read three values, gamma to the power 3, right? So it is in some state P and it will read three values below the current head. It will be some B, B hat and A. So it will read B, B hat and A. These are the three values, and based on this it will make a move, right? And what will be that move? It will change the state to Q, okay? It will rewrite values at all of these three positions under the head. So it will rewrite this by some A1, A2, A3, right? And then it will move the head one position to the left or right. So the head moves from here to here, right? This is what is called a three-track Turing machine, and you can have a K-track Turing machine, right? But remember, there is only one, all there is only one head, and it is simultaneously reading all the tracks. So the transition function has this form. You read three input values on the three tracks to rewrite those three values by three new values, but you move only one step left or one step right, right? And this is nothing but basic Turing machine whose tape alphabet is this more complicated gamma to the power cube. This gamma to the power cube we can call as a new tape alphabet. New tape alphabet is a three column vector of values. We can treat this as a single value and we get back a basic Turing machine. So this is nothing but a basic Turing machine whose 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 tape alphabet consists of three tuples, a column vector of three symbols, right? So I hope you are convinced that this is nothing but basic Turing machine with a tape alphabet which is a little more complex, but it's still a tape alphabet, and we can treat it as a basic Turing machine. So there is this multi-track Turing machine, but a more advanced machine would be what would be called Okay, so this is the same as basic Turing machine with this complicated alphabet. But we can think of a more complex Turing machine, which I shall call as multi-tape Turing machine. Here we have three separate heads. So in a three-tape Turing machine, I have got three tapes like in three tracks before, and each one will store symbols. But each tape has its independent head. Okay, and these three heads need not be at the same position. And what does the transition of such a multi-tape Turing machine look like? The machine is in some state Q. So suppose the machine is in some state P. It will read the value under each of these three heads. So suppose it reads values A1, A2 and A3. Because there are three heads, it will read three values. And it will make a move based on this. And this move will be what? It will go to some new state called Q, because there is only one state. It will go to some new state Q. It will rewrite the values at the heads by some B1, B2, B3, and then it will independently move each head in whichever direction that you define. So for example, you can choose the first head to move left, second head to move right, and the third move to move left. So you see, one head may move in one direction, the other head may move in a different direction. It is possible. And after some number of moves, these heads may wander off and be very far from each other. So is the difference from multi-track Turing machine clear to you? We have got this multi-tape Turing machine. And it computes like this. Okay. This is going to be a very, very useful extension of Turing machines. We'll find this very useful, and this is what we will use in simulating other more advanced computers. Okay. So this is the multi-tape Turing machine, right? So it has got, this is a three-tape Turing machine with three tapes and three independent heads. And its move table looks like this, that being in the current state and reading the values at the current heads, you change your state, and then for each head you decide what is the value to be written as well as the direction of its move. So this gamma across left right is done independently for each head in the move, right? So is the idea of multi-tape Turing machine clear to you? Any questions here? Don't worry about this. Is the idea of multi-tape Turing machine clear to you? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some use of this multi-tape Turing machine. Okay. Or before that, let me, I mean, this machine will be very, very useful. We'll just see in a moment. If there are no questions, let me tell you that this multi-tape Turing machine can be simulated by basic Turing machine. Okay, and that simulation is something that is we will see in this and the next slide. Firstly, you know, the current configuration of the multi-tape Turing machine, where you know the first head is at this position, the second head is at this position, and the third head is at this position, can be represented by a more complicated multi-track Turing machine, where the heads are all in the same position. What we will do is here the tape alphabet will be of the following form. You know, it will be of the form gamma union gamma hat. That is for every symbol A of the tape alphabet. We will also have an additional symbol called A hat in the tape complicated tape alphabet. So my new tape alphabet gamma prime for this new machine that I am building will actually have two copies of each tape symbol, a normal symbol and a hat symbol. And the hat symbol is to designate the fact that my head is currently at this position. So you know, here on the first step the head was at this symbol B, which was the third symbol. Here I'll write third symbol as B hat instead of B. So you know, the position of the head will be actually recorded by changing the symbol on the tape by its hat version. Similarly, for the second tape, the head was at this fourth position. So I will, at the fourth position, instead of B, I will have a B hat. And at, you know, for the third tape, I'll put a hat here, right? And the way we will design the Turing machine, only one of the symbols on this each track will be a hatted symbol. Everything else will be a normal symbol. So the hatted symbol represents the current position of the head on that tape. Is this clear? It's a simple idea. You just mark the position of the head physically by a designated mark on the symbol. Any questions here, Sujit? Hello, Sujit.
No, sir.
This is clear, right? We just put hat where the head was supposed to be. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, suppose my original Turing machine, multi-tape Turing machine, made a move like this. Being in current state at whatever position the heads were, I read suppose A1, A2, A3. I will go to state Q, replace the A1, A2, A3s at those positions by B1, B2, B3, and then I'll move the first head to the left, second head to the right, and the third head to the left. In emulating this, our basic Turing machine will always begin with head at this position. Okay, or if you like, head at this position, right? And what it will do is, in simulating this one move of this Turing machine, we will go through a number of stages. So we will do very many stages going up and down this Turing machine to emulate just this one move. Okay, but it will have the same effect as as this transition. What we will do is, our state will consist of state of the new automaton will consist of all the states together with what will we have? We will have 3 copies of the symbols gamma cubed, right? And I'll tell you why. So in the state we will remember 3 symbols. Up to 3 symbols we will remember in our state. We will have ability to have, let's say, registers in our state which will remember up to 3 symbols, and then there will be some stage numbers. I'm in stage 1, stage 2. I will be in some 5 or 6 stages through which we will go. So first we will start with stage 1, and what we will do is we will scan this multi-track machine with only one head, left to right. And whenever we hit a hatted symbol, we'll remember in this. So first time we will hit a B hat. So suppose my current state was P. I'll start with P with 3 registers being empty. So I'll be in a state which looks like this. This is the state of my new Turing machine. Okay, basic Turing machine, which has a complex state consisting of 4 tuples, right? And initially I will say that I don't know where the position of any of the heads is. I will keep scanning left to the right. When I reach this position, I will read B hat on the first track. So what I will do is I will transit and I'll remember P with B. So I'm remembering that the symbol on the first track was a B. Then I will scan ahead. Then I'll find a B hat on the second one. So I will go to this kind of configuration when I am at this position. And then I will move the head from there to here. At this position, I will make a move and I'll remember my state was P, and I have found on the second track also under the head a B. And I will go on like this. At the end of this phase, I will know what were the symbols under all the 3 heads in the original machine. In this state, I will know that I will have, if this was what the original machine was reading, I will have a configuration P, A1, A2, A3. So now I know what were the values. After finishing this scan, I will come back to this original tape initial position. At this position, I know I have to move to state Q. So I will go to Q and I will remember that I have got to write B1, B2, B3 at the head positions, right? So this is what I need to write. And here I was in stage 1. Okay, so I should also remember together with this which stage I was in. I was in stage 1 here. I will write the stage in blue. Now I have moved to stage 2. So I was in stage 1 throughout. Now I have moved to stage 2 where I know that I've changed the state to Q and I'm going to have to write B1, B2, B3 at the hatted positions, and I need to change the location of the hat also. These 2 things I have to do. So first what I will do is also in the along with this, I will also remember the directions. So at this point, I will also know that I have to move the first head to the left, second head to the right, and the third head to the left. So my state is also going to remember LRL. So this is a finite amount of information, and I can have a complex finite state control which will remember all this. So when I found my three symbols under the heads, I can go to state 2, where I from this I know that I will be in state Q. I have to write B1, B2, B3, and I have to move the heads to left, right, left. This is what I will do. I will start phase 2, in such a such a state of my basic machine. Now I will start scanning, finding the hatted symbols, and I will change A1 hat to B1 hat in the first track, you know A2 hat to B2 hat in the second track, and A3 hat to B3 hat. I'll finish that path, and whenever I change it, I will make it blank. So I know when I've finished this whole pass, I will have written the three symbols under the tape heads in the original machine, but I have not changed the position of the tape heads. I have to move the first head to the left, second head to the right, and the third head to the left. For that, again, I will do a stage 3, where in stage 3 I will scan till I find the hatted position in the first track. I will rewrite, instead of B hat a B there, and because I had to move left, I will move one step to the left, and whatever symbol I read there, I will rewrite it with its headed version, right? Then I will go again, to the initial position and start looking for a hatted symbol in the second track, and this time I have to move right, so I will replace this B hat by B, and then go to next position, read the letter there, and convert it to its hatted version, right? So by doing this, three stages, and these stages have sub stages, I will be able to emulate one move of the original Turing machine. So details are not important, but I think you have to convince yourself that I am able to do the job of this one move of the original multi-tape Turing machine by this, very complicated several passes over this tape kind of move. But I can do it. And whatever will be the effect of this move will show up as the effect on this multi-track this thing. And multi-track is just a basic Turing machine. So I think this is simple. I mean, the argument is not complicated. The encoding is messy, but with this encoding, you are able to simulate the one-step move of a multi-tape Turing machine by several phases of one track. Sorry, of a basic Turing machine. Who is not convinced? Any doubts? Because this reduction is going to have a very far-reaching consequences. Simple as it is. So, any doubts? Parth, you're convinced? Hello, Parth. Okay, Rani. Hello.
Yes.
Looks convincing, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This was Turing's argument. Vishal, you are also okay? Hello, Vishal. Sujit?
Yes, sir.
Looks believable, right? The detailed encoding I have not given, and it's not important. If you are really given, let's say 10,000 rupees to design the actual simulation, you will be able to do it. You see the scheme, right? Okay. So that's the idea. Okay, so now we have got this multi-tape Turing machine, right? And here is the a short description of it. You'll find Cozen also describing this, but there's no point giving the full scheme. Now with this, we can do a lot. So I'm going to do something here. Suppose you've got two Turing machines, basic Turing machines, TM, M1 and M2, right? With the same tape alphabet, with over sigma, right? And we want to find out, show that Turing machines are closed under intersection. That is, we want to define a Turing machine which will recognize language of M1, intersection language of M2, right? So for finite state automata, if instead of Turing machines we had finite state automata, how would we recognize the intersection language? Anybody remembers? So Parth, do you remember how we did this for finite state automata? We showed that given two finite state automata, we could construct a finite state automata which would recognize the intersection language. Don't worry if you don't remember, I'll remind you. Remember what we had to do was we had to, on the same word X, on the same word, we had to run the two machines simultaneously. The first machine M1, would be in some state P, and the second machine would be in some state P prime. And we would, reading the first letter A, this was in P1 and this was in P1 prime. This would go to P2 and this would go to P2 prime. So, on the same letter, we will run both the machines simultaneously. That is, we'll have a tuple of states, we'll have a product automaton whose states would be tuples of states, first component coming from the first machine, second component from the second, and we'll make on the same letter a transition again going to a tuple. So we'll run the two automata simultaneously in a step-by-step manner, right? And if both of them reach their accepting state simultaneously at the end of the word, we will say that we have accepted the word in both the automata, so it belongs to the intersection. So Parth, you remember this? This was called the product construction or cross product construction. Recall this Parth? Hello, we have lost Parth. Maybe some net problem. Sujit?
Yes, sir, I remember.
Yeah, so we ran these two machines in parallel, right? Doing each step of the two machines simultaneously or one by one. We could have done it in interleaved fashion. First one step of this, then one step of this. But effectively, doing them together, right? Okay. So we can do something similar for Turing machines. Okay. What can we do? We will use, a two-tape Turing machine. So what we will do is we'll have a tape 1 and a tape 2, and our Turing machine will write the input word on both the tapes. Blank, blank, blank. The second tape will also have blank, right? And initially the head will be here in both the tapes. And then what we will do is, following the transition table of the first machine, we will make a move on the first tape, and following the transition table of the second machine, we will make a move on the second tape. So we will have a kind of composite state, P1, comma Q1. This will be the state of my product Turing machine, and what it will do is reading whatever symbol under the head of the first machine A1 on A2. What will I do? I will go to some P2 Q2, writing B1 B2 and moving the head direction D1 in the D2, where this is the transition of my composite machine, the product machine. Here my P2, here what I will have is in the first machine under P1 on symbol A1, I'll be going to P2, writing symbol B1 and moving in direction D1, and delta 2 of P2 A2 will be, this will be Q2 Q1. I'm sorry, Q1 Q2 B2 D2, right? So we'll combine the moves of the two Turing machines into a single move of this multi-tape Turing machine. After all, there are these two independent tapes, and we can define the control now to act independently on both. So in the first tape, we will mimic the first machine. Second tape, we will mimic the second machine, and we will move them one step simultaneously. So this two-tape Turing machine can easily, sort of run these two threads, if you like. Remember, this is before any operating systems, before any physical computers are built. Turing is already simulating two Turing machines on a single machine using two tapes. And then he has shown that two tapes can be mimicked by a single tape. You know, right? So you are running two Turing machines in parallel. So Turing machines, multi-tape Turing machines give you power of running independent Turing machines simultaneously in a time shared manner. And modern day operating system like ideas are already occurring in Turing's work. So you see this? So you can define intersection. Okay. You can also do union. If any one of them reaches the accepting configuration, you accept. Okay. So who is not convinced? Who is convinced that we can do, that Turing machines or recursively enumerable languages, RE languages, are closed under union and intersection by this construction. So we have shown some closure properties. Theorem. By this simulation of two Turing machines using a multi-tape Turing machine, RE languages are closed under union and intersection. By the way, if this was a total Turing machine, the resulting Turing machine that we will get is also a total Turing machine. So recursive languages are also closed under union and intersection. Do you see this? So we have this very nice property that you can do these things in parallel, and that is what this multi-tape Turing machine gives you. Ability to run separate Turing machines on separate tapes and in lockstep manner, one step of the first machine simultaneously with one step of the second machine, and you can do this simulation. So this construction is also sometimes called dovetailing of Turing machines. We will call it the product construction. So we can use this multi-tape Turing machine to do what is the product construction. So remember that product construction. This is an important phenomenon in case of Turing machines. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about non-deterministic Turing machines, and I will be very brief here. We won't do full details, but we could have a non-determined. So far, our Turing machine was of what form? Given current state and the current symbol that we are reading, we will go to a state Q, writing B in place of A and move the head left or right, where D is either L or R, right? What we can have is we can non-deterministically have many possible moves, right? So a transition function of a non-deterministic Turing machine, instead of prescribing 1 3 tuple, will prescribe some k possible choices. So we could non-deterministically move to this make this move, or on reading P and A, we could make either this move or this move or this move. One of the k moves we could make, and the choice is non-deterministic. Agreed? So this is what is called a non-deterministic Turing machine. Okay. And so as a result, you can conceptualize the behavior of such a non-deterministic Turing machine not as a run, but by a tree of runs. So we start with the initial configuration of the Turing machine. Let us assume, for simplicity, that at each stage you are given exactly two choices. The situation, you can generalize this to k choices, and the situation is not very different. So our non-deterministic Turing machine gives you exactly non-deterministic choices of two alternatives, and maybe the two alternatives are same, giving you a unique choice. That can also happen, but basically we have two choices. So starting with the initial configuration, if we take the first choice, we can move to this configuration. If we take the second choice, we can move here. So we have possibility of two successor configurations. This is one step move. This is also one step move. And the choice between them is non-deterministic. An angel will guide you as to which branch to take. From here again, there are two choices. So we get a kind of tree of runs, and any path in this tree will give you a run of the non-deterministic Turing machine. And we say that the Turing machine accepts if there exists one possible run. The angel guide you to take the correct branch where you reach the terminal configuration. So if you reach a terminal configuration in one of the branches of this configuration tree, then you say that the initial word is accepted. So is the notion of accepting by a non-deterministic Turing machine clear? It is just like our non-deterministic finite state automata, that there are many possible successors of a state on a given word, and an angel guides you to take the correct one. Until there is a possible set of choices which will lead you to an accepting state, you accept. So the same idea here, right? So idea of non-deterministic Turing machine is clear. Now this seems to, see, this tree can grow to any possible depth, because these Turing machines, there is no bound on, in accepting a word of length 5. You may go and, go move far ahead from the 5th position and go and write some symbols on the tape. You'll use a lot of scratch memory for your intermediate computation. So the number of steps taken in accepting can be very large, in fact unbounded. You don't know beforehand how many steps it will take. So this tree can grow very large. And finding out whether there exists a path which leads to termination or not seems complicated. In case of deterministic Turing machine, there was only one path. And we just had to execute that path and find out whether it reached terminal configuration or not. But here, somehow, in order to accept conceptually, this machine has to, explore this tree. And that is difficult. And yet Turing managed to show that every non-deterministic Turing machine, I'll write non-deterministic Turing machines as NTM, and I will reserve TM for deterministic Turing machine. Every non-deterministic Turing machine can be simulated by a deterministic Turing machine, which accepts the same language. So the power of non-determinism can actually be absorbed within the deterministic Turing machine. And I will not do the full proof, but I will give you an overview of the idea. So the proof is omitted. We don't have time for it. But the idea is that what we will do is, whatever is the input to the non-deterministic Turing machine, we will have basically a 3-tape Turing machine. First tape will be the work tape. It will be like the tape of the normal Turing machine. Second tape will be what I will call as input memory. So the input word which is given to the Turing machine will be copied onto this tape, and it will never be changed. So we will remember what was the input. Okay. So we know what the input is. And then we are going to separately try various branches of this Turing machine one by one. In some systematic order, we will explore this tree till we reach a terminal configuration. That is what we are going to do. So how do we work? We work like this. We copy this input word onto the work tape. And then there is a third tape called the schedule tape. This schedule tape will basically do the work of the angel. On it will be written a sequence of bits, because we have two choices. Going to the left is denoted by 0 and going to the right is denoted by 1. Right? So currently the schedule says in the first move, choose the left side configuration. That is, of the two possibilities, non-deterministic choices, choose the left possibility. In the second move, choose the right possibility. So you come here. So the path that you follow is this, and path that you follow is this, right? This is the right one. Okay. And then of course it will go further, so it will tell you have to go left and right. So this schedule is telling you explore the Turing machine like this. By giving a schedule, we are choosing one partial path of the Turing machine. If this leads to an accepting configuration, you accept. If it leads to rejecting, you have to try other paths, right? So what you do is and every time you begin the path, if you reach a rejecting configuration, what you have to do is, once this schedule is over, you start anew. So you copy this input tape once again on the work tape and start from the beginning, following a new schedule. So every time you are given a schedule, you can begin by copying the initial word onto the work tape and following this schedule, you can explore a new partial run. So you can explore different runs from the starting configuration again and again based on different schedule. So if you're given first this schedule, then another schedule, you'll first explore one path, then you will explore another path. Now what the Turing machine can do is, it can systematically explore all possible paths in these trees by enumerating these sequences of zero ones. So first it will say just explore a path with only one move, which is the left move, from the initial configuration. If this leads to acceptance, accept. If this doesn't move, next try one move to the right. So first you explore this path, that doesn't work, then you explore this path. If that also doesn't move, explore 0 0, that is one move here and one move here. If that leads to acceptance, you accept. If that doesn't work, you try 0 1, that is one move left and one move right. If that also doesn't move, you try 0 0 0, then you try 0 0 1. And you can systematically change this string to this string on this string. This is computable. Once you got 0, you increment it by 1. You can do this binary increment on of the number here by 1 by a very simple calculation on this schedule tape. So you can systematically enumerate all the schedules on this tape, and having enumerated a new schedule, you go and emulate it on the work tape starting from the initial configuration. So by doing this, you will be able to explore this tree fully, and you will be able to simulate this non-deterministic Turing machine. I'm not going to ask you questions on this. You just have to remember the fact that a non-deterministic Turing machine can be emulated by a deterministic Turing machine by systematically simulating each of the possible schedules which are systematically generated. Okay, this is the idea. So basic Turing machines are very powerful because you can do it by this multi-tape Turing machine, which can be done. So any questions here? So you see this Turing machine is quite brilliant. It can do all this, although simple as it is. Okay, I'm giving you a lot of information, but today we are not doing the details of the encoding. We are just getting an overview of how things are done. So these properties are called robustness of Turing machine. That basic Turing machine is very robust. You want to do something more complicated like multi-tape, I can do it. If I want to do product of two Turing machines, running them simultaneously, I can do it. If I have a non-deterministic Turing machine, I can do its job. So it's very robust to these new ideas. And we will continue with this theme of robustness. Let's consider something called two-stack push-down automata. So remember, in original push-down automaton, we had a finite state control and we had one stack. So this is what, forget this, don't look at this, only look at this. We had one stack under the control of a finite state control, and we could read the top of the stack, we could see the current state, and depending on what is the state in which you are, what is the input symbol being read currently, and what is at the top of the stack, we could make a move, and we could replace the top of the stack X by a string gamma 1 and move to state Q. Now we have a machine where there are two stacks available. So what you can do is you can be in some state P, you can read the current input letter under the, which is not yet read, and you can read the top of both the stacks. So on first stack, let's say there is symbol X, and on the second stack top, there is symbol Y. Now based on this information, we can change our state from P to Q, replace the first stack top symbol X by gamma 1 and the second stack top symbol by gamma 2. So we simultaneously use two stacks, right? And in fact, you can talk about K-stack automata. So multi-stack push-down automata can be defined. And these are very hot, because, if you write a recursive program, it will require one stack. And if you write a two-thread recursive program, that is your two independent concurrently running two recursive programs are running concurrently, then you will get a two stack configuration. So this is going to mimic multi-threaded recursive programs, and that is a hot area of research these days. So we can have this kind of two stack automata, right? So is the idea of two stack automaton clear? there is this input word being processed and we are using two stacks instead of one stack, and its transitions will look like this. Its transitions will look like this. Reading the top values on both the stacks, you make a move and you replace both the stacks by corresponding strings gamma 1, gamma 2. Okay. So it's a simple generalization of one stack automata. Now, how powerful are these two stack automata? Okay. So it can be shown that two stack push down PDA push down automata can be simulated by a 3-tape Turing machine. Okay. With first tape storing the input word, second tape storing the stack 1, and the third tape storing the stack 2. So on tape 2, I will store this word in this order. Left, left marker AB. On the second track, I will store on the third track tape, I will store the second tape, and my head will always be positioned at this last position. Because in stack, I only have to read the last position. I don't have to move the head inside. Stack has that property that you can limitedly change things, examine and change things only at the top of the stack. So head will be positioned here. And then whatever is the move of this two stack automata, I will make corresponding changes, to the two tapes, right? If this B has to be replaced by gamma, I will replace this by gamma here, gamma 1. And if this B has to be replaced by gamma 2, I'll replace it by gamma 2 here, moving the head this way. So I can easily mimic a two stack automaton by a 3-tape automaton. The first tape will contain the input and two additional tapes will represent the two stacks. Stacks are a very limited form of tapes, right? So this is very easy, right? So my Turing machine is at least as powerful as two stack push down automata. In fact, K stack automaton, because K stacks can be emulated by K tapes, right? So my Turing machines are rather powerful. And of course, since it can do K tapes, it can do one stack also. So we also get from this emulation a simple proof that PDA are a subset. That is, the class of languages that it can recognize is a subset of what RE languages, right? In fact, recursive languages, because the resulting Turing machine will be terminating. Just as PDA terminates, K-tape PDA terminates, this will also terminate, right? Sorry, K-tape PDA may not terminate. Sorry. Yeah. So this is a subset of RE languages. Okay, so we get this result. So CFL are a subset of recursively enumerable languages. Okay, so but what about the reverse? How powerful are these two stacks compared to Turing machines? We can in fact show the reverse, that a basic Turing machine itself can be simulated by a two-stack automaton. So this two-stack automaton model is as powerful as Turing machines. So here is an alternative machine which has the power of Turing machine. And how do we see this? We see this by doing like this. We have these two stacks like this. We will store these two stacks by means of a so what do we have to do? We have this two stack automaton, right? We already showed that two stack automaton could be done by Turing machine. Now we have a Turing machine which looks like this. We want to store it as we want to emulate it as a two stack automaton. What do we do? If my tape configuration is like this, after this position, let us say there are only blanks, right? So remember, what do? We can represent this by means of two stacks. So we break this tape content into two parts at the head, and the part to the left we store on the first step, and the part on the to the right of the head we store on second step. And then whatever movement we have to do here, suppose this B we have to change by, so this will represent the current cell. or let us say this will represent the current cell. Now if you want to change this B by A, we'll substitute on this stack, we will pop this, we will erase this B and put this A here. And if you have to move head one step to the left, what we will do is this symbol will transfer to this stack, and so our head will come here and this stack will grow. So by exchanging symbols between the stacks, you can actually mimic between these two stacks, you can mimic the movement of the head, right? This is what we have to do. So we will not go into details, but with some amount of work, you can simulate a single Turing machine by two stacks. And so push down two stack automata and Turing machines have the same power. This is what I want to tell you. The last thing that I want to do is something called. Hello? Yeah.
PDA can also accept, I mean, all recursively enumerable languages.
Which one?
The two-stack PDA.
Yes, you can simulate this, but yes, it can accept all recursively enumerable languages. That is correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Is that like, I mean, is this proof very detailed or something?
No. It's a simple idea. How do you do the each operation on the Turing machine, which is reading the current value at the head, which is at the top of one of those two stacks, designated stacks. Let's say the right stack, right? So the symbol here is the symbol under the head. Everything to its strictly to its left is on the first stack, and everything, including this B and to the right, is on the second stack. Ignoring the blanks. Okay. Then you can very easily mimic each move of the Turing machine by exchanging symbols between these two stacks and changing symbols at the top of the stack. Suppose you want to rewrite this B by an A, this B you rewrite by an A. Now, if you want to, move the head one step to the left, what will happen? This B which was on this stack, should come on this stack. So what you do is on this stack, you add an extra B, and this B you pop, and the head will come here. The stack pointer will come here, right? So by transferring things from one stack to the another, you can mimic the motion of the head going left or right. So it's not very difficult. Okay.
Yes, sir. I see it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not doing the details. Any of you, if you're given, 10,000 rupees, will be able to work out. But the sense is this. So two stack automata are as powerful as this. Now we consider a new model of computation which is very popular, called K counter automata. This is like modern day computers where registers store values, let's say integer values. And here we are talking about perfect machines where each register can store, let's say, an arbitrary precision integer, okay, or arbitrary precision natural numbers. So all of our counters will store natural numbers, and there is no bound on how large a value it can store, right? So what we will have is a K counter automata where in place of infinite memory or two stacks, instead it will have K counters as the memory that it can use. So it's a system where there is finite state control. Then there are K counters, let's say C1 to CK, which will store some value, I1 to IK, some natural number values, and there will be the input tape. This is a two-way read-only tape. So our input word will be given AB, AAB. Between, it will be written on this input tape, and the word will be enclosed between a left hand marker and a right hand marker. And the machine, has a head which can move in both directions, but it can never change this input. So input is there only for reference. Okay. So you can read the input. You have finite state control, and you have got these K counters, right? So these natural number counters initially are initialized to value 0. So in the start configuration, the head will be on the left hand marker. The counters will all be 0, and your finite state automaton will be in its start state. And of course, we have three states: a start state, an accepting state, and a rejecting state, in this finite state control. And every transition of this K counter automaton is like this. Knowing the current state of the automaton, knowing the currently read symbol, which is some symbol A under the input head, and based on some condition on counter Cj, you can choose which counter you want to test. Testing counter Cj, we so what is a test for the counter? We can check whether the counter is 0 or not 0, or we don't check anything on the counter. We make the move anyway, irrespective of the value of the counter. So, optionally on testing a counter for 0, you can make a move. So your move is based on whether a certain counter is 0 or not, or you don't want to do a test. So the test is either counter Cj is 0, counter Cj is not 0, or no condition, right? On that you make a move. And what is the move? You change the state to Q, and you do a basic operation on one of the counters, CL. You can choose which counter you want to change, right? And that operation is either you can increment the counter by 1, or you can decrement the counter by 1, or you can leave it as it is, no op. So 3 possibilities. So in each basic move, you can test the counter for 0 before making the move. If that is the case, you can choose some other counter or the same counter and either increment it or decrement it. And you can change the position of the input head, the one step to the left or one step to the right? So you can also choose the direction in which this head moves. Of course, you should never go to the right of the right hand marker and never go to the left of the left hand marker. That healthiness, that well-formedness condition is there. So this thing, and you can also make epsilon moves. So you don't have to read the current input. Even on epsilon, you can make a move like this. This is called K counter automata, and a very popular model of computation, right? Now, one thing you can see is this K counter automata. You can decide how many counters you want to use, but my exercise to you is to see that a one counter automaton can accept this language A raised to n, B raised to n, C raised to n. Okay. So how shall we do it? Let us try to do it by adding a page here. We'll give the scheme. So our word is given here, some A, B, 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 C, and then the right hand marker. This is my input tape, right? And I've got K counters. Sorry, I've got one counter, C, whose initial value is equal to 0, and the head is here. So my configuration is, I am in the start state. Let me write the configuration of the counter machine. I will be in the start state S. This will be my input tape, which will never be changed, but the head position can change. Head is pointing here, and my counter value is 0 initially, right? And what I want to do is I want to recognize A raised to n, B raised to n. So I will write rules in my automaton, which will scan from left to right, counting how many A's are there. Every time I meet an A, I will increment the counter. So I will go to configuration S. I will skip over this and I will come here. A, B, 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 C, this. And since I have skipped over the left hand marker, counter remains 0. After that, I will make one more move. I will remain in state S, and I will skip over the first A, but I will remember that I skipped over one A by incrementing the counter to 1. Now I'll keep incrementing the counter, scanning from left to right till I find a non-A symbol. Okay. Okay, in the first phase, I will make sure that the string is of the form A star, B star, C star. This I can do but just using finite state control. So first I assume that first I do that. After that, I start counting number of A's. And so I will keep counting like this. When I reach B, my counter will be 2, telling me that the number of A's in my word is 2. At which point I will move to a state called S1, and then I will start moving the counter left. So let me just tell you what happens. A, B, 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 C, C, left hand marker, right hand marker. In the first phase, the counter automaton will scan from left to right till it hits a non-A symbol. Okay. Initially, of course, it will check that the word is of the form A star, B star, C star. That does not require any counter. That can be done just with finite state control. After that, it will scan the word from left to right. and count the number of A's, putting the count in the counter. Once it hits a non-A symbol, it will return back to the first position, right? It will return back to the first. At this point, the counter will have value 2, remembering that I have had 2 A's. Now, in the next phase, I skip over all the A's, and when I meet a B, I start decrementing the counter. So as many B's as I get, I decrement the counter, right? So counter at some point will become 0, and I'll have one more B left. Now I'm seeing a B, but the counter is 0. So number of A's is not equal to number of B's, and I will reject. Right? If that was not the case, if the number of B's was equal to number of A's, but number of C's was larger, I will get my counter 0 and I will encounter a C. So now I know that number of A's is equal to number of B's and I have hit a C. At that point, I move to the next phase, where I again go here, and once again I count the number of A's into the counter. So I'll finish counting A's and I will get 2 as the count of A. Again, I'll move to the end. I don't have to, but I move to the end. And then what I do is I start scanning right till I hit a C. Every time I get a C, I decrement the counter to check that the number of C's is equal to number of A's by decrementing the counter. So this way, by moving over this word up and down and using this counter, I can check that the number of A's is equal to number of B's equal to number of C's. So you can see that one counter automaton can do A raised to N, B raised to N, and C raised to N. Okay. This is going to be the
automaton be more powerful if instead of natural numbers, any integers are allowed for the counter?
Of course, it will be seemingly more powerful, but it turns out that you can emulate it using this basic K counter automaton. Maybe you'll need some more counters which will store only natural numbered values. So what you do is in your finite state along with the counter, in a separate counter which will take value only 0 or 1, you will remember its sign. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Counter is like a register, and although it's a arbitrary precision register, you can use it just to remember value 0 or 1. So you can remember a sign bit somewhere.
No, because like in this example problem that you're given, so instead of A n, B n, C n, if we had A n, B n, C n, I mean A n, B n and C power 2n instead of n.
Yeah.
Then using this current scheme, we should be able to calculate the number of A's and B's together and subtract all the C's.
That also you can do. So what you are saying is a language of the form A raised to I, B raised to J, C raised to I plus J.
Yes.
Yeah, this you can do with a single counter, right? You just count I, then don't reset the counter. Whereas B come, keep incrementing. Right? So increment the counter on A's, increment the continue incrementing from there the counter on B's so that you get sum of the number of A's and B's, and then decrement on C's.
Yes, but instead if we put A power I, B power I plus J and C power J, then
I plus J and C power J.
Yes.
Yeah, you can still do that. What you can do is you can count all the I's, skip over B's, count increment on the C's till at the end of the tape you got I plus J. Then go back and then check it off against the number of B's.
Okay.
So one counter will do it.
Yes, sir.
But you can also emulate the idea of subtraction. In fact, somewhere in if you see your book, Hopcroft, Motwani, Ullman, they show you how to do subtraction using Turing machines. Okay, not using counter automata, but using Turing machines. Okay. Okay. Now this is one counter automaton, right? What I'm going to show is something like this. A Turing machine can simulate K counter automaton. Not just one counter, but K counter automaton. And I am only going to give you the sketch of the proof. Okay. And how does it work? To simulate K counter automaton by Turing machine, what do? You use a K plus 1 tape Turing machine. The first tape will contain the input word and is used in read-only fashion, because input word, in counter automaton, the tape was read-only. You could move in both directions, but you could not, change the content of that tape. So you do the same on the first tape in case of K k plus 1 tape Turing machine, right? And the remaining k tapes you will use to simulate the k counters. Basically, if the counter, jth counter has got value n, then the jth plus 1 tape, because the first tape is gone for the input word, jth plus 1 tape will represent the value of the counter cj by writing n zeros on the tape. If the value of the jth counter was n, then you write it in unary by writing n zeros on on the tape and positioning your head at the last position always, right? So you can represent the number in unary on the tape by writing so many zeros. After that there will be blanks. So is the representation clear? I mean, it's not very difficult, right? The value of the counter has to be, every counter is stored on a separate tape. And if the value is n, you write it as n zeros followed by blanks. Okay. Now, what are the basic operations you need to do? You need to increment the counter, which means add one more zero onto the tape at the head. So move the head one step to the right and add a zero. You want to decrement the counter, replace that, the head is always on the last zero, replace it by blank and move the head one step to the left. So you can increment or decrement the counter. Testing that the counter is zero means the head is positioned on the left hand marker. So it's very easy to emulate k counter Turing machine by k counter automaton by a k plus 1 tape Turing machine, and k plus 1 tape Turing machine can be simulated by a basic Turing machine. So basic Turing machine can do the job of k plus 1 k counter automaton, right? So this is easy. So Turing machines are certainly as powerful as k counter automata, but are they more powerful? And the answer is oops, what happened? Okay, so what we say is that we know that Turing machines, two stack automata, are as powerful as Turing machines. And what we will do is we will emulate two stack automaton by a four counter automaton. So we directly, the proof of emulating a Turing machine by a 4 counter automaton gets messy. What we do is we actually emulate two stack PDA by 4 counter automata, and we already know we can emulate a Turing machine by a 2 stack PDA. We saw that, right? So from TM to 2 stack we already saw. Now we will emulate 2 stack automaton by a 4 counter automaton. So 4 counters are sufficient, right? First simplification we do is that the stack alphabet, we were talking about 2 stack PDA, but it is sufficient to consider stack alphabet only consisting of symbols zeros and one. Why is there? Suppose we have got a stack alphabet which consists of 4 symbols A, B, C, D, right? What we can do is we can represent each of this symbol by a binary string 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And what we do is on the stack, by a sequence of moves on the stack automaton, we can actually check that the top 2 symbols are 0 and make a move and change the top 2 symbols to 0, 1. So we can always work in terms of blocks of bits, so we can simulate, operations on fixed length blocks of bits on the stack by operations on single bit on the stack. So without loss of generality, I'm not doing the detail, we can assume that our 2 stack PDA has stack alphabet only 0 and 1. Okay, it's not very difficult to do that. It's like representing ASCII characters by 7 bits. Okay, now what we do is we can so our stack will contain what? Bottom followed by 0, 1, 0, 1, something like this, right? We will represent this as a string, as a number, as a binary number, as a counter value. And this will be the MSB. Okay, and this will be the LSB. So top of the counter stores the least significant bit, and so we can represent the content of the stack as a counter, right? By reading of bits from bottom to top, and the resulting binary number converted to decimal. So we get the counter value. So every stack can be represented as a counter C1. So given one stack, its value can be stored in a counter C1, right? Now, what are the operations that you do on stack? You you want to check whether the stack, we want to push a 0 onto the stack. So pushing 0 onto the stack means the number that you have represented has to be doubled, because if it was 1010, you are adding a 0 to the end. This the new number by adding a 0 is double of that. So you want to double the counter. In order to do that, you use one more scratch counter, and every time you decrement C1, increment C2 by 2 times. Okay, and successively decrementing C1 by 111 and incrementing C2 by 2 times, you will get value in C2 which is double the value of C1, and then copy that value of C2 into C1. So you can double a counter. This simulates pushing of 0 onto the counter. Pushing of 1 is double the counter and then add one more 1, right? Because pushing a 1 on the stack, what does it do to the integer representation of the stack? It does 2x plus 1 if x was the value of the original stack. So this also you can do. Decrementing the, popping a 0 from the top of the stack means halving the counter, and popping a 1 from the stack means what? First decrement the counter by 1 and then halve it. So we can emulate all these operations on a counter, and hence if you've got 2 stack PDA, first stack will require 2 counters, and the second stack will also require 2 counters. So basically a 4 counter automaton will be able to mimic the working of 2 stack PDA. And we know 2 stack PDA are as powerful as Turing machine. So 4 counter automata also recognize exactly the class of recursively enumerable languages, right? So what is the power of 2 stack automata? RE languages. What is the power of 4 counter automata? RE languages. Okay, all these are equivalently powerful models of computation. But do we need 4 counters? That is the question I want to answer. We know that 1 counter automaton could already do A raised to n, B raised to n, C raised to n. And we saw that 2 counter automaton can handle push down automata, because 1 stack can be emulated with 2 counters. Right? So 2 counter automaton is already, as powerful as push down automata, maybe more powerful. We don't know. Okay, so the exact answer to the question is that a 4 counter automaton can in turn be simulated by a 2 counter automaton. I know I'm taking you through many models, but you can see this idea of simulation, how powerful it is. And the idea is that a 4 counter automaton, the value of the counters will be some ijkl, right? This 4 tuple of natural numbers can be represented by a single natural number. This is called the Gödel encoding of 4 tuple of natural numbers. In fact, Gödel gave it for n tuple of natural numbers, but here we have 4 tuple of natural numbers. We can represent it by a single number, which is of the form 2 raised to I multiplied by 3 raised to j multiplied by 5 raised to k multiplied by 7 raised to l. So the number of occurrences of factor 2 will give you the value of I. Number of occurrences of factor j are 3 will give you the value of j. Number of occurrences of factor 5 will give you k, and number of occurrences of 7 will give you k. And there should be no other prime occurring within this number, the Gödel encoding of the number. So this kind of natural numbers represent 4 tuples ijkl. This is a very powerful idea. It says that n tuples of natural numbers can be represented by some subset of natural numbers using this Gödel encoding. Okay, so instead of having 4 counter automaton, we will have a 1 counter which will represent the value of the 4 counters. Now we want to increment and decrement, let us say the counter j. Now counter j is represented by power of 3. That means we need to multiply it by 1 more 3. So whatever is the Gödel number of this, if you want to increment counter j, the equivalent Gödel number will be this Gödel number multiplied by 3, right? If you want to increment j, it is same as multiplying. That you can do by using one more scratch counter. So you need a second counter where you will decrement this counter by 1 and increment the second counter by 3. Every time you decrement this counter by 1, you increment the counter C2 by 3. So in the end, you will get 3 times this number. And so you will have incremented this j component of this ijkl in this representation. Decrementing means dividing by 3. Similarly, if some other counter, you increment by 5 or 7. So you can mimic the operations on this 4 tuple, of incrementing, decrementing by suitable operations on this Gödel number. And hence 2 counters are enough. So the theorem is that two counter automata are equivalent to are equivalent to 4 counter automata, which are equivalent to 2 stack automata, which is equivalent to Turing machines. So Turing machines are equivalent to 2 counter automata. I will not do this proof, but 1 counter automata are strictly less powerful. So there's a gap between 2 counter automata and 1 counter automata. Okay. So what have we done? We have done a lot of equivalent models. We have examined robustness of Turing machines. Basically, our basic idea of Turing machine was we had a single head and one-sided tape, one tape, right? With end marker. We could emulate multi-tape Turing machine using this one tape Turing machine. So these are equivalent. So all these have equivalent powers. Non-deterministic Turing machines, which are seemingly more powerful than this basic Turing machine, can be emulated by having that scheduler, tape by one basic Turing machine. Two stack pushdown automata are as powerful as Turing machines. Okay, and k counter automata with k greater than equal to 1 are as powerful as this. So all of these recognize RE languages, right? They recognize the same class of RE languages. And as I told you, there are some other models which we didn't do, which is Gödel's mu recursive functions. Then there is Church's lambda calculus. These also give you the same power. So you see, there is a very large class of very different looking models which are all equivalent, and of all of this, Turing machine is the simplest machine which seems to be able to, or at least one of the very simple machines which seems to be able to emulate other machines. So this embodies, and the Church Turing thesis says this in fact embodies the essence of computability, what can be mechanically calculated. Okay. So that is what I wanted to do. Other thing we did was TM can emulate products of TM, right? So we can solve intersection or union such problems. Two Turing machines can be simultaneously run on a single Turing machine, by having them on two separate tapes and emulating two tape machine by a single tape Turing machine. So we also have concurrency, if you like, built into this model. Any questions? So this is a large leap, I mean, it took over, it took many years to develop these different models and show these equivalencies, but a lot of it was anticipated by this one, by Alan Turing, sort of research assistant after doing his bachelor BSc in mathematics. He did all this, and then there was this question of giving him a PhD after all this work. There's still more that he did, which we will do in the next class. Okay, I want to finish with two theorems. We had this class of Turing machines and we had subclass of Turing machines which were total. That is, on every string it would definitely halt and answer yes or no. It will either accept or reject, right? And the languages recognized by total Turing machines were called recursive, right? So we know that if A is recursive, if a language is recursive, then its complement is also recursive. This is an easy thing to see. Can anybody tell me how? So Parth, you want to give a try? I will help you. Parth, are you there? Okay. Parth seems unreachable. Rani, you want to try? Don't worry, I'm there. I'm going to help you. Okay. So if we say A is recursive, what does it mean? There is a total Turing machine which recognizes A, right?
Yes.
What will this Turing machine do? Starting from initial configuration, it will go and it will reach the terminal state T2 from initial configuration alpha 0, it will in some n moves, it will reach some terminal configuration to accept if the word is in A. And it will definitely in some m moves, it will reach the rejecting configuration if the word is not in A. It must do one of the two, right? It cannot loop. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
Now, this Turing machine will reach T whenever word is in A, and it will reach R whenever it is not in A. And we have called T as the accepting configuration and R as the rejecting configuration. Now we want to recognize complement of A. That is all words which are not in A. So what should we do? Whenever we reach R, we should R designates that the word is not in A, and T designates that the word is in A. Right? So what we should do is, whenever we reach R, we should accept the word in order for it to belong to the complement. So we switch these two states R and T. This we will call now as our accepting state, and this we will call as our rejecting state. We exchange the role of accepting and rejecting states. Everything else remains same in the Turing machine. This new Turing machine M prime obtained by exchanging T and R will exactly recognize the complement. You can convince yourself of this. So now we have produced a Turing total Turing machine which is recognizing the complement by switching the R and T states. So this is a very easy proof. A slightly more complicated theorem is this: if A is RE and complement of A is also RE, then A is recursive. That is, if you have a Turing machine which given a word on A, given a word from A, will terminate and say that the word belongs to A. So there is a Turing machine M which will test whether word belongs to A. If the word is not on A, the Turing machine may keep computing forever or may reject. You don't know which one will happen. I'm going to take one more minute, please. Okay. There is another Turing machine N which given a word will say except if the word is not in A. But if it is in A, it may go on forever. Now what do? You run these two Turing machines M and N simultaneously. On one tape, you have an input tape, and so you have a 3-tape machine. You basically run M and N in parallel. So you run machine M on tape. So this is tape T0, tape T1, and tape T2. Right? You run M and N simultaneously. If you do the product of M and N, if M accepts first, then you accept the word. If N accepts first, you reject the word. One of them must accept after finite number of moves. So the resulting Turing machine is going to be a terminating Turing machine, a total Turing machine, and that is why the resulting language then A is RE, because now you can build this new modified Turing machine which will accept whenever M accepts and it will reject whenever N accepts, right, by running M and N in parallel. So this ability to run two things in parallel gives us this theorem. So with that, I want to end today's lecture. We have done a lot. We have basically said basic Turing machines, although inefficient, are rather powerful, and we have done some closure properties of languages. RE languages are closed under intersection and union. Recursive languages are closed under union and intersection, and we have these two properties for recursive languages, right? Okay. Some of you are here. So I'm going to end today's meeting with this. I'm going to end the recording.